Hey Hokie Nation, happy Friday morning. Thank you guys for joining us. It's the video edition of the very popular series, the Friday Q&A. Chris will be answering your guys' questions, but make sure to check out the article after this for some more in-depth stuff on this week's contest. I'm Kyle Marchak with Chris Coleman, the source of all your answers today. And Chris, the fans want to know, so you ready to roll?
Oh, let's go.
Let's do it. All right, well, the first question they wanted to hear about is most defensive coordinators are up in the booth, right? Should Marve be up there if he isn't now?
Yeah, actually most defensive coordinators I found are on the field. Bud Foster was on the field. Hamilton was on the field. Offensive coordinators are always in the booth, but it seems like defensive coordinators want that on-field perspective of things, and they like to coach their guys directly because in a lot of cases they're linebacker coaches, and they like to have that personal feedback, I guess, and the feel for the game from the sideline. It's a little bit different for defense. I don't think Marve should go to the booth. I think what Virginia Tech needs is like a really experienced assistant coach in the booth that can identify things quickly. That's what Bud Foster had at his peak. He had Jim Cavanaugh in the booth, and Jim Cavanaugh, he was a defensive coach at Tech, but he was actually a previous offensive coordinator at Maryland and maybe another school or two that I'm forgetting. So this was a guy who understood offense. So he could identify what offenses were doing very quickly, communicated that to Bud, and once Bud had the bird's eye view from Cavanaugh, he made adjustments. And you saw it time and time again. Bud's defense wouldn't necessarily get off to a great start in game, but after a drive or two, he would adjust and just dominate people from there on out. So that's something that I would potentially be looking at adding in the offseason. An older, more experienced coach on the defensive staff to put in the booth to have an extra set of eyes from up high for Marve.
Yeah. Who would it be right now?
That's a good question. I don't know who they have up there right now. It might be, is it Sean Quinn probably? He's probably the most experienced defensive coach on the staff. Prelo might be up there too. It would make sense to have a safeties coach up there. But, Quinn's kind of always he's a former head coach and not necessarily your coordinator type. And, Prelo's just in his third year as a full-time coach. He played in the NFL for a long time, but he's inexperienced from a coaching standpoint. So I'm talking about get a 50 or 60-year-old guy who's been seeing things for a long time and put him up there in the booth.
Gotcha. And then what I was curious about, Mansoor Delane's struggles, was that skill-based, or is a vantage point going to help what he was struggling with?
He had some technique issues. Yeah. And he missed his jam on the touchdown reception, and that was a very tough throw and a very tough catch, but the idea is to jam him at the line of scrimmage, get him out of rhythm so their timing's off, so when the quarterback throws the ball, the receiver's not in the area yet. And so that play was kind of lost from the very start, even before the ball was thrown. I know Mansoor Delane's capable of playing much better than he did last week. We all know that. It's just a matter of getting your confidence and being focused in and working on that technique. He's not going to play like that all season. Yeah. You got to get it back as quickly as possible.
Now, Delane needs improvement. The whole team needs improvement after game one. The fans wanted to know, is it true that we usually see the most improvement from game one to game two?
Coaches have always said that, and our fans are used to hearing Frank Beamer say it. He's probably said it more than anybody else, or maybe not, but that's just who we're used to hearing it from. I think it's true, but you have to understand that coaches are thinking about it in a different way of fans. Fans are just looking for the final score, right? And did the team look better? Did they gain more yards? Did they give up fewer yards? And things like that from week one to week two. Coaches are looking at the entire operation, like the smoothness of, are you getting the signals in properly? Or is everybody where they need to be on the sideline? Do you have two guys with number 0 running on the field at the same time?
Working?
Right, exactly. Yeah. Just the little things behind the operation. That's what they're talking about a lot of times when they say things like that. That's not all of what they're talking about, but that's a big chunk of it. So yes, they do, but with the caveat that it's not necessarily the types of things that the fans are looking for.
Yeah. I mean, well, when you look at the final score just in the past couple of years, 2023, they walloped ODU, and then they looked mediocre at best against Purdue. But then in 2022, they lost at ODU and then got their first ACC victory against Boston College, but still. So do you think there's a trend to watch there? Or?
It could be. I don't think Virginia Tech has played a good game in any of Brent Pry's 3 openers. Yeah. I thought they got out schemed by Old Dominion last year, but Tech out talented ODU.
Yeah.
That was just a matter of fact. Like ODU, if you look at the rushing yards in that game, ODU just completely out-schemed the Hokies and out-rushed them. So Virginia Tech is having an issue with opening season games for sure. So hopefully from an X's and O's standpoint, things are back on track this week, because they were off track last week for sure.
So from a macro perspective, what I was curious about, Marshall's offense was terrible last year, but they have a new offensive coordinator. I think his name is Seth Dougie. Dougie. Gotcha. From Purdue.
Daggy. His brother was the starting quarterback at West Virginia a few years ago when Tech played West Virginia.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Seth Daggy, and then 30 transfers on the entire roster too. So in terms of, like, let's say a percentage scale, how confident do you feel in us having their offense figured out in some sense? Because clearly we underestimated Vandy.
Yeah, I think about 75%. It'll be an air raid type offense with a lot of shotgun and one back formations, and those offenses aren't as difficult to figure out schematically as that option stuff that Vandy was running last week. The air raid's actually fairly simple. It's just run from a number of different formations, whether it's trips on one side, 2 receivers plus a tight end. The route concepts are generally the same. It's just kind of up tempo. It's easy to stop in theory, but it's more difficult to stop once you get out there on the field. But from a schematic standpoint, I wouldn't anticipate any issues this week. This is standard stuff. And plus you're going up against a 35-year-old offensive coordinator who's never been an offensive coordinator before, so it's not like you're going up against an old head like Tim Beck last week, who won national championships at the Division II level and was just an outstanding X's and O's coach. Not to suggest Dagy's not, but he's 20, 25 years younger and just doesn't have the experience. And Marshall's got a couple of quarterbacks, and they come from kind of a mobile background, and they've never been particularly effective passers. So it's going to be the biggest question to me is what's their run pass mix? Normally in an air raid offense, you're going to see about probably 70% passing thereabouts. Marshall's, their quarterback strengths haven't really been passing the football.
Yeah.
They do have a passer, but he's probably their third guy on the depth chart, Pennington.
Yeah.
The son of Chad Pennington, the great Marshall quarterback. So I don't know exactly how they're going to handle their quarterback situation, but schematically, I don't think it should be an issue for the Hokies this year. And if there are any wrinkles, it shouldn't take nearly as long as it took last week to make adjustments.
Yeah, I mean, that first half was slow. And
it was not fun.
It's tough when they play Stony Brook. What Pry humbly said was, an above-average FCS program. That could be debated.
It can be debated because they were 0-10 last year.
Pry's PR trained, right?
Historically, they are an above-average, but COVID actually wrecked their program. They were pretty good. COVID hit. I don't know if they just lost a lot of transfers or they couldn't fund their program after that, but they're a pretty well coached football team. I don't want to turn this into a Stony Brook podcast, but they have a long time head coach who's done a good job, but it just seems like COVID wrecked their program and they haven't been the same since.
Gotcha. All right. Well, let's cycle it back to the Hokies. The PFF grades. This will be our final question. The one that stood out to me, the O-line ranked 98th. Obviously, they struggled, but Peebles led the defense. Drones led the offense. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, kind of like you expected. I mean, Peebles, Eric McLean sat in that chair a few weeks ago and called him a war daddy, and that's kind of what he is. I think he had a good game. Texas defensive tackles in general played fairly well against Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt's scheme was just good. That they didn't put themselves in a position to be consistently beaten by Tech's defensive tackles. They did a lot of outside stuff and just made things difficult on the Hokies schematically. As far as Drones goes, I thought he had a very difficult first half. And I thought he was very good in the second half. I think everybody struggled in the first half, coaches included. So, and when the coaches struggle, your players are going to struggle too. But I thought he threw the good sign for Drones is last year he was 9 of 42 on passes that traveled 20 plus yards downfield, and this game he was 3 of 3. So his accuracy rate on those balls downfield last year was one of the worst in the country. And, Vanderbilt sat on that in the first half, and because they knew those numbers, they can do math too. And Virginia Tech was able to open it up in the second half, and he showed he can complete those passes on a more consistent basis than he did last year. That's important going forward for future defensive coordinators. Maybe they'll be a little less hesitant to crowd the box.
So I guess the question for
Or
drones
more hesitant, excuse me.
Yes. I guess the question for drones then, and this will be my final note, is he going to look more than 5 yards downfield in that first half?
You would think so. So much of offenses are dependent on your reading at the line of scrimmage and what the defense does. You're going to check into this and check into that. Sometimes you got to find a way to be a little more assertive in what you want to do. That's easier said than done sometimes, but I guess maybe that was one of my issues last week is I don't know how much of that was those plays weren't called or if he was just checking down quickly. But you've got to show the ability to be able to challenge defenses down the field. Tech has shown that ability. Now they have to show the willingness.
Cool. All right. I think that about wraps things up. Any final thoughts?
No, I think Tech should do better this week. I think they will do better. I think this Marshall staff, I don't know how well-funded Marshall's program is because they've actually, you're allowed unlimited number of coaches these days. And if you go up and down their coaching staff roster, they've still got the regular amount of coaches. So this is a smaller staff and it's an inexperienced offensive coordinator. Their defense got worse last year under their current defensive coordinator when he was their first year guy last year. So I don't see this group presenting as many coaching issues as the Vanderbilt staff. So I feel like this should be a fairly comfortable win for the Hokies. If it's not, then
said that last week.
Dig in your heels. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, Chris, I appreciate you. Make sure to check out his article on techsideline.com. You'll get way more there. And that's going to be every week on Friday. But for now, I'm Kyle Marchak, and we'll catch you guys next week for our Friday Q&A.